to the Chosen Aftershow. I'm so glad that you are with us. My name is Lance Marshall, and with me, as always, is my co-host, my colleague, my fellow pastor at the First United Methodist Church of Fort Worth, Texas, Reverend Dr. Zhenya Gurina-Rodriguez. Zhenya, how are you this evening?
I'm wonderful. I'm looking forward to the conversation. This was a fun episode.
It was a very interesting episode. We have a lot to talk about. Before we do so, let's have a quick read from our sponsors. It's nobody's sponsoring us. It's just us. All right, let's start with our episode recap. The episode opens with Jesus alone in prayer at a nighttime campsite. He appears to be camping by himself somewhere in a semi-wilderness area. His prayers are full of pain and emotion as he entreats the Father to speak through him. The next morning, a young girl, Abigail, happens across his campsite while he is away. She looks casually through his belongings, among which are his carpentry tools and basic wares. She hides as she hears him returning, afraid that he's going to be angry if he sees her. Later that night, Abigail's family dinner discussion is dominated by the worries and cares of an ill family member. Abigail concocts an excuse to return to the campsite the next day with her friend in tow. They arrive to spy on Jesus and are surprised that he welcomes them with kindness, even joking in levity. He explains that he's a traveling craftsman from Nazareth visiting for a time. The children find him kind and engaging, and they ultimately run off back home before they return the next day with 4 more friends. They are enchanted by Jesus and constantly pepper him with questions. He is patient and kindly answers them, letting them work alongside him as he shares and teaches. He asks them if they know the Shema, and hearing them pray the words brings tears to his eyes. A montage of scenes shows him patiently including them in the process of his life and taking the time to teach and be with them. In his speaking with them, he's more than just teaching. He's teaching them the kingdom of God to the children, notably before he's even begun to do so for adults. Ultimately, Abigail asks what his purpose is, and he tells her, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to proclaim good news to the poor," and so on, so on, so on. The next morning, Abigail returns and finds that Jesus has stricken camp and departed. She finds Jesus has left her a note and a special gift, a dollhouse replica of a barn and manger that eerily recollects his own humble beginnings. The mysterious stranger is gone, with no clue of what lies next in his future. Episode 3 of The Chosen. Let the little children come to me. Zhenya, what sticks out when you think about this episode? When you go back in your mind, what's the first thing that sticks out to you about this episode?
That is the whole episode is about children. I was like expecting, Simon pop up or Mary Magdalene. And then I think, well, this whole children thing, I guess, is going to go on for the entire episode. So just children as disciples of Jesus, children as the first ones to hear him like teach the Lord's Prayer,
Yeah.
Cool. Like I wouldn't think about that.
Yeah, it's just kids. And it's so funny that we're talking about the fact that it's kids right now, because the first thing that came to mind was he's really patient with kids.
They are not his own.
Is that it? Is that the point? I'm looking off to the side because I'm pulling over everything on Facebook Live to get the comments here. There everybody is. I want to see your comments as we talk. Yeah, he's being a lot more cool with kids than a lot of people are right now.
Yeah.
Like, thanks Jesus for showing us.
We had them for a few hours after the second meal.
What he's doing is not nearly as hard as what we're doing. I mean, no. Not even. Yeah, except when he gets woken up by them, like out of bed, that'll preach. That's a parent moment right there. Yeah, it's all about kids and his incredible patience with them. He spends time with them, camping, praying. Like, yeah, this was an episode. And I just want to stop and pause about this, talking about this show and what this show is and what this show isn't. I have to say, like, what would you think, Zhenya, if I was to say, because we went into the show blind. We didn't know anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
And what would you have said in the beginning? I'm like, hey, we're going to watch a show about Jesus. The first episode, he's not in it. The second episode, he's not in it. And then the third episode, he's in it, but he's just like talking to kids all the time while he saws and hammers. You want to watch this show with me? Like, one, what would you have like? What do you think about those choices they're making in making the show? And then would you have watched the show if that's what you thought, if that's what you knew it was going to be like?
Oh, I would totally watch the show because the first thing that I'm thinking is like, this is not like any of the Jesus movies I've seen.
Yeah.
And I want to see something different. Like, I don't mind this kind of creative imagination because it challenges me, you know? So I would actually be intrigued by it even more than just, let's watch a mini series about Jesus.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I felt like I looked at this, I was like, oh, it's 9 episodes. Episode 1 is the manger, and episode 9 is the road to Emmaus. Like, done. That's what I had imagined the show was going to be. And so, yeah, I really want to celebrate that that's like not the case. And I really want to appreciate the showmakers for doing something different. And so, kudos to them for doing something interesting. Okay, so next segment, something surprising. Something that sticks out, something that you didn't expect to see or that really resonates with you. I'm going to go first on this. The first thing that was surprising to me was almost, I feel, are you familiar with the phrase an Easter egg in movies or shows, Zhenya? An Easter egg, you know what that is? So an Easter egg, for anybody who don't know, is like a little scene or a little something that you have to be like really in the know to know what they're talking about. Like maybe it's something small in the corner. If it's the third movie in a series, it's a reference to movie 1 or, you know, things like that. There's little hidden details. Well, when Abigail is first discovering Jesus's camp, she is going through different stuff and she finds his cooking pot and she picks up like a coal and almost, I can't remember if she touches it to her lips or the doll's lips. I can't recall which was. Do you remember what I'm talking about at all?
No, I totally missed that one.
She picks up a coal and she holds it to her lips, which is that's a biblical deep reference. That's a reference to Isaiah 6:7. That's like the commissioning of Isaiah. And Isaiah basically talks about not being worthy. And then an angel in a vision, an angel takes a coal from a throne and puts it to Isaiah's lips. And then the coal touching his lips is actually considered an atonement of sin and like right orientation towards God. So like this woman, this little girl who's encountering Jesus and the coal in the lips and atonement, like that's like very Easter eggy for the Bible nerd crew, basically.
I'm gonna go back and watch it.
I may have totally missed that. I may be completely making it up. So there's like
I don't know. I haven't noticed it.
But... Okay, so maybe that was me. It was late. I was watching it.
No, this is cool. This is
yeah. So there was like a real deep cut there for Isaiah 6:7. The little girl Abigail picks up the coal, like touches it to her lips before she's encountered Jesus. First 5 minutes of the show. So that's a deep cut, which is that's something surprising. A deep biblical reference to the prophet Isaiah, which is completely different than the other thing that was very surprising to me, which is Jesus making fart noises.
Strange noises. Closed caption called them strange noises.
Yeah, closed caption called them strange noises. They're fart noises. And which I kind of am comforted by the fact that like I would love to know that children 2,000 years ago thought fart noises were funny and endearing. I'm assuming that's innate. I'm assuming that didn't happen like right recently. It had to have been the case. I think about Jesus literally every day of my life. I've never imagined him making fart noises. Not that he wouldn't, but that was surprising to me. Zhenya, what was something surprising to you? What's something that surprised you to see?
Okay, I laughed so hard, when it's morning and Jesus opens his eyes and he goes from, well, originally it was 1 kid to 2 kids, which is okay. Like, I get that. You invite a friend. But then he opens his eyes and like the kids just multiply. Like, where did they all come from? And then they just keep hanging out there, keep coming back. So I just thought that was really funny how kids multiplied. One
of my best friends growing up was Drew Morrison. Drew, if you're watching, hello. And Drew's house just became the house that everyone went to. And I feel like that's what Drew's dad experienced every time he walked around the corner of his own house. He's like, there's more of you. It just be packed. There's just more and more and more kids kept multiplying at his house. So yeah, that cracked me up.
I almost expected an eye roll from him, but he didn't do it. But he was not real happy either. It was more like, okay.
His morning. I mean, and I don't know anyone I actually have this comes up later this actually comes up for me in nitpicking. I have a nitpick here, so I don't want to go down the line too far on the camp scene and the morning scene. But that is, this is the comedy, the physical comedy of that. It reminded me a lot. Have you watched The Mandalorian yet?
Yeah.
It reminds me of the physical comedy of this baby Yoda just kind of like showing up in different places. It's very much the same. Okay, things to know. Next segment. Things to know is a time when Zhenya and I break down some stuff, some things that might not make sense to you if you haven't thought about them before when you're watching the show. This is something that if you better understand it, you're going to be able to pull a lot more content and meaning out of the episode. So Zhenya, you go first. What's your thing to know for this week's episode?
So there is a scene when the kids are talking among each other, trying to figure out who Jesus is. Like, is he a creep? Is he a murderer? Is he whatever? And one of the theories is that he's a prophet. And then I forgot which kid, but one kid says, oh no, Rabbi so-and-so says that there is no
more prophets.
No more new prophets. So that kind of caught my attention. So I looked it up, and there was literally 400 years, which there is even a name for it, 400 silent years. Starting with the prophet Malachi, which is like the last book in our Old Testament, who was about 420 years before Christ, until John the Baptist. There is this big window of history of Judaism where there were no prophets. And doesn't mean that there were no writings. People continue to write, to retell the stories of the old days. You know, there is a lot going on. But in terms of like the figure prophet, like we think about Isaiah, Jeremiah, Elijah, like that kind of stopped until, you know, John the Baptist and Jesus. So that's what
compare that to like right at or before the Babylonian exile, where prophets are coming hot and heavy. Like lots of prophetic voices.
Yeah, there is almost always, there is a prophet, there is a king, and then there is a prophet. So it's kind of like an established rhythm. And then for 400 years, which is a long stretch of history, it stops. So that's what the kids were referring to when they said that there is no more new prophets.
Yeah, we don't look for more. Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of the kids, that's my thing to know for this episode. And remember, you have to transport yourself into Jesus's time, and there's different expectations. And there's a kind of a cultural truism in America is that if you maybe grew up in the 40s or the 50s or the 60s and you're watching the show, maybe the attitude of adults towards children was different than the attitude of adults toward children now. Maybe it was less coddling, maybe it was less attention oriented. Who knows what the stereotype is? That's the stereotype of parenting and the attitude of adults toward children that's changed. Well, it is certain that 2,000 years ago, the attitude of adults towards children was very different. Children were not the center of the household. The family was not organized around the child's extracurricular activities. We didn't orient ourselves around their interest. The homes were not purchased with the children's desires and activities in mind. They were, I mean, not fully human. Is that unfair to say?
No, true.
Yeah, they're not totally people yet. They're kids. They're not really people, and they're not worthy of a lot of things, particularly the time and attention of someone important. And so the cultural expectation of them, like one of the reasons Abigail runs and hides is this guy's gonna be mad at me because I'm a kid. I'm anywhere around him. And one of the reasons the kids are so drawn to him is that this is a special and different person. An adult, a stranger would probably be interesting to them in a world where communities are kind of tight knit, but that kind of kindness and generosity toward them would have been just completely paradigm shattering, because that's not the way that adults acted towards kids. So that's a key. That's something that's underlying in this entire episode, but if it hasn't explicitly been illuminated, it might be surprising. So that's my thing to know. Okay. The best segment, premier segment of the Chosen Aftershow. What did Edwin and Elizabeth think? Edwin is Zhenya's husband. Elizabeth's my wife. We watch the show with them. They're watching with a different level of focus and interest. I have my computer out. I'm taking laptops. Elizabeth has Instagram out. And
yeah, I'm pretty sure that Edwin was scrolling through his media during all of that talk between Jesus and the kids. He did though notice and pointed it out to me, like, look, Jesus didn't have to child-proof his campsite, and the kids could play with knives. And you see, like, if Jesus did it, like,
why are we being so careful?
Yeah, because I'm kind of like a Nazi when it comes to, knives lying around the house.
Yeah, real.
Oh yeah, some background. My husband is a martial artist, and he trains with knives and swords and machetes. So these objects sometimes appear in our house, and I'm not quite comfortable.
Edwin brings like machetes home?
Yeah, we have a machete in the living room right now.
In the living room.
Yeah.
You have a 2-year-old and 4 dogs. How does that?
It's hanging on the wall, and we think that Theo can't reach it yet.
Okay. All right, I have to stand up real quick and get my light to be less shiny on my face. 1 second. It's bothering me too much. So, okay.
Oh, come on. You were shining like Jesus.
I had a halo.
Oh, no, like Moses. Like Moses, your face was just,
I've seen the glory of the Lord. Hold on. So Marsha has pointed out, by the way, Marsha Waugh made a comment that Jesus knew Abigail's name, that he never asked her, and that she didn't tell him. I missed that detail, Marsha. I cannot confirm or deny. Do you remember that?
No, but you know what? I think that's right. Yeah.
Okay, I cannot confirm or deny, but Marsha's got pointed that out, and we have another couple people thumbs upping that as well. So Marsha, thank you for sharing that. That was news to me. I had missed that. So what does Elizabeth think? Her first, she said, watching Jesus do chores is really comforting. She loved watching Jesus do chores and just having to do stuff like, which, you can really tease that out and say like Jesus, the fully human and fully divine, fully embodied the mundane aspects of human life, and in doing so embraced them, whatever you want to say. Elizabeth just said, I like watching him do chores. It's really comforting. So I like that a lot. And then she also, this is her favorite thing. She loved how he immediately put them to work.
Yes. That's the only way how you can deal with so many kids. Yes.
Yeah. I love how let the little children come to me. Hey, you chop that wood. Hey, you wrap that string around that pole. Like, he's got them working, which is really true. I mean, kids do want jobs. Like when they want to participate, they want to be included, and so that was inclusion. It was a good way to keep them engaged, but he's also just giving them work to do.
Well, because they keep showing up and they're not going away, and they multiply.
He's like, all right, carry this then, I guess, if you're going to be doing that. So that's what Elizabeth thought. She thought it was super comforting to watch Jesus do chores and to see him go to work. Okay. The premiere segment of the Chosen Aftershow. This is what people tune in for. This is what they want. This is what they want to hear. And they want to hear from Zhenya. I'm just a
oh, come on.
I'm just in your sidecar of your motorcycle here, because
Yeah.
our premiere segment is nitpicking. What was wrong? What do we have issues with? What do we question? Zhenya, it's you. It's always you. You've got it. What's your nitpick?
So Abigail being able to read, we've been down this road already with Mary Magdalene, and now
does it help if she's 10? Does that make it easier?
I just have a problem with that. I just find it very hard to believe that all of these girls from very poor families, that they are able to read. So few people were able to read at that time. It was a sign of status. It was a sign of education. And it just, I don't know, in 3 episodes, 2 women being able to read, I have a hard time swallowing that one. Anyway, moving on. I guess that will be my pet peeve for the rest of the show. If they have more women reading, I will continue to complain about it.
The next episode, she writes a letter and puts it in the mail.
Oh, no, don't kill it for me.
I'm sure that's what they have. They have a post office. It's great. She
Yeah.
types an email.
By the way, I'm all for like girl power. I love how they make female characters in the focus of the story. Like I enjoy all of that, but some things just don't sit quite right with me.
Why don't we categorize it as a wonderful anachronism?
Okay.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if it was true?
Yeah, yeah. So the one point that I really want to dig in, and I looked it up and kind of poked around, is the conversation that Jesus has with the kids about Messiah and who Messiah is. So I believe it was a boy who said, Messiah would lead us against the Romans. He would be a great military leader. And then Jesus replies, is there anything in scripture that says Messiah will be a great military leader? Implying that the answer is no.
Sure.
And yes, there is.
Oh, Jesus.
Jesus, you need to know your Bible. Come on. So
if you think that's bad, I got a better one for you in a minute. But
okay.
Hold on. Yeah.
You want to go ahead?
No. You go ahead. I'll get there in a minute. It's fine.
Okay, I'm almost done with my Messiah rant. So Messiah, Messiah means anointed or chosen ones. And through the Old Testament, that applies to kings, also prophets and priests. But kings, one of the main things, like think of King David, King Saul, like that's what they did. Like you were supposed to go to war, you were supposed to fight, and you were supposed to win. That was the big deal. That's what makes you a great king like David. So I even pulled up, like there is a reference to calling ruler Cyrus. He is actually called Messiah in Isaiah 44. Then there is something that's called Psalm of Solomon. We don't have it in our Bibles. It was written roughly around 200 years before Jesus, but it circulated a lot around that area, so people are probably familiar with it. And here's how they describe who Messiah is. They say, and he will be a righteous king over them, taught by God. There will be no unrighteousness among them in his days, for all will be holy, and their king will be the Lord Messiah. Let's see. He will have the strength to destroy the unrighteous rulers, to cleanse Jerusalem from Gentiles, to trample her to destruction, to drive out, blah, 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 blah. So this long psalm that just shows that Messiah is going to be this king that's going to come, and fight a war and win it. Yeah. So I'm off of my soapbox. Yes, Jesus, there is something in the scriptures about Messiah being a warrior.
Oh, no. A quick nitpick pointed out by Julie Fagan that Abigail raises her hand like she was in a modern classroom to answer a question. Excellent nitpick there. Okay, my nitpick regarding camping. No one in the history of the world, I'm a big advocate for the idea that camping's terrible. I'm a big advocate for the idea that the outdoors are awful. I know the fact that the outdoors are awful, and the reason I can tell you they're awful is because if the outdoors were great, we would make the inside like the outside. We intentionally make the inside great because the outside is so bad. So anyway, that's an accepted fact. There's no need to debate it. But I can also say that no one person ever has had a good night's sleep in a tent and has slept 2.5 hours after the sun rose. There's no way. There's no way that he's woken up by them. But that particular focus of nitpicking aside, we have multiple accounts of Jesus being up early in prayer, and Jesus rising up early to pray. A holy man of God, that would have been a big part of the identity of what it is to be early. So he's not sleeping in. But that's not my nitpick. My nitpick is actually something that has nothing to do with the content of the show, but the shape of the show itself. And that is the concept of a bottle episode. So this is where my expertise comes in, Zhenya. This is where I
have no idea what this means.
This is where I actually have something to add to the table as a lifetime student of American television. There's a concept called the bottle episode. And a bottle episode is created in a show. And what it means is basically the entire show takes place in a bottle. So if you ever see an episode where all of a sudden the show breaks its normal habit of having a whole bunch of characters and a whole bunch of scenes and a whole bunch of locations, and all of a sudden it's just one person in one place in one scene, that's called a bottle episode. So my nitpick, The Chosen, a lot of times bottle episodes, sometimes they're genius. If you've ever watched Seinfeld, the most famous bottle episode of all time is the Chinese restaurant episode of Seinfeld, where it's all just taking place in the waiting room, trying to get a seat for a Chinese restaurant. The parking garage scene, another bottle episode. Those are hallmarks. A lot of times bottle episodes happen because something went wrong in the production and they had to create a whole new scene or a whole new episode from scratch because something fell through. So a lot of times that's how bottle episodes come to be. Either way, nitpick, it's too early for a bottle episode in the show. It's only episode 3. We're just now getting rhythms and stories. We're getting really invested in Simon. We're getting really invested in Matthew. We're getting really invested in Mary Magdalene. All the extra stuff with Jesus is great, but to not have any of those other narratives coming through, to me, aficionado, student of American television, it's too early for a bottle episode. So that's my nitpick. Let's talk. Dallas, give me a call, man. You're doing great work. I'm very thankful for this. We'll talk about it for season 2. So that's my nitpick. Okay. Deep dive. Zhenya deep dived in your nitpick a little bit, bringing all those that text. But deep dive is a segment where we peel back the curtain and help you better understand something that's going on by getting into the nitty gritty and explaining what's happening there. And that's what I want to do first in talking about the Shema. So very interesting scene that happens when Jesus is beginning to teach the children and interact with them is he asks them, do you know how to pray the Shema? And they answer him and they pray a prayer. They all pray it together in unison. They pray it from memory. So this is obviously something that's very important to them in their world. What is the Shema? And so Shema comes to us from the book of Deuteronomy in the Hebrew Bible, chapter 6, verse 4. Israel, listen, our God is the Lord, only the Lord. That's the name. That's how it goes in English. Shema Yisrael. And then it's in Hebrew. It's an affirmation of the oneness and the nature of the one God. That's the Shema. And then afterwards, the next verses, the Deuteronomy writer writes, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your being, and all your strength. These words that I'm commanding you today must always be on your minds. Recite them to your children. Talk about them when you are sitting around your house and when you're out and about, when you're lying down and when you're getting up. Tie them on your hand as a sign. They should be on your forehead as a symbol. Write them on your house's door frames and on your city's gates. So they're written on mezuzah that you'll see pasted on the door frames of Jewish people's houses. We had one in my college dorm because my roommate was Jewish. So we had a little mezuzah on the corner of our door frame. This is a prayer that they would have prayed. Jesus would have prayed this prayer historically, absolutely every single day. There's no getting. Jesus would have prayed Shema every single day. The community would have prayed Shema every single day. And so asking if they know the Shema is just kind of checking in on their cultural identity and their heritage. And so, yes, absolutely, they would know what it is. So the Shema is like a foundational, the first prayer they learn. So if you're a Christian, you don't have an understanding what the Shema is, it's going to be completely foundational to their practice of ritual prayer and community together. So that's my deep dive. I wanted to make sure everyone knows what the Shema is, where it comes from, and how it plays into their life, which is where my thing to you, Zhenya, came out. You said Jesus would not have not known that aspect about Messiah in the Old Testament, right? Yeah. Well, apparently I was watching the commentary on this episode, and when they first recorded it, nobody who was writing the show or the actors knew that it was pronounced Shema. So when they first recorded the scene was originally recorded with Jesus saying, do you know how to pray the Shema?
Shema.
And then one of their partners watched the episode, watched one of the early returns that came back and saw that, and he's a Messianic Jew and goes, oh, no. There's a 0.0% chance that Jesus would have called it the Shema. And so they had to go back and re-record over it, then pronounce it correctly, the Shema. So they caught it, but that would have been like a horrific mistake had that gotten all the way through to publication. So that's the Shema and what it meant to them. That's my deep dive. Zhenya, what's your deep dive?
So this scene where a little boy tells Jesus how he dealt with a bully, I guess at the school. I didn't know that they had bullies at the school back then, but I guess they did.
At Torah school. It's tough to get bullied at Torah school.
Torah school. That's right. So he says, well, I punched him because the Torah says an eye for an eye. And then Jesus interrupts him and says, well, yeah, but that is for a judge, and you hardly are in the court of law. So what's fun about this phrase, it also comes up in New Testament in Matthew, where Jesus teaches a new spin on it. But in the Old Testament, there is 3 laws that have this phrase, an eye for an eye, and they are so hilarious. So like, if you want to look it up, just Google, an eye for an eye, and those 3 passages will come up in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. So in Exodus, it talks about if you are in a fight and there is a pregnant woman involved, and if you injure a pregnant woman, like in your eye, then you also will, lose your eye. So it's an injury to pregnant. It's like pregnant women have a little bit more status than like regular women. So if you punch like regular woman who is not pregnant, then, you may get away with it. But if she is pregnant, you may lose your eye.
Who's not a pregnant woman in their fight? That's just not.
I don't know.
It's like a bad episode of Cops. I
know. It's a bizarre thing, but it's in Exodus 21. It's this entire, paragraph that describes a fight where a pregnant woman gets injured and what to do with that.
All right. Turn to our Bibles, guys. Let's figure this out.
It comes up also in Leviticus, but there it has nothing to do with pregnant women. There it has to do with a false witness. So if you are about to lie on the stand and you say so-and-so did this, and that's why we need to poke his eye out, but they find out that you are lying, you're going to get your eye poked out. Mm-hmm. So anyway, and then there is Deuteronomy 19, which is a little bit more general. But I always thought it was hilarious how this phrase that we can just throw around, that it has very specific context.
It is very specific context. Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you for the deep dive on eye for an eye. Okay. So I was going to say, we're not Bible experts, but that's not true. Zhenya is, but we're both preachers. And so we can't watch this show without looking at it through the lens of what about this show will preach? What about it will connect with people? What about it is good news that needs to be shared? What about it is a lesson that's to be learned for us in the midst of our faithful lives in 2020? What will preach? So Zhenya, starting from you, when you think back about episode 3, what'll preach? What about this show will preach in this episode?
I love this scene where Jesus recites the prophet Isaiah, pretty much answering the question to the children who he is. And the reaction of the kids is just like, yes, tell us more. Like we want to know more about you. We like you have our attention. They're all in. And I remembered how it's like Jesus does say exactly the same words in a synagogue in his hometown Nazareth, and the account is in Luke 4, and people get so angry at him. That's the part where the crowd pushes him and wants to push him off the cliff.
Right.
And Jesus has to kind of use some of this power that is it's not quite clear what happens, but he walks away from the crowd. But the adults were so angry that he would claim that he's the one that is going to fulfill the prophecy of Isaiah. And the children were not. They were fascinated. They were amazed. They wanted to hear more. So just watching their reaction and that kind of openness to the good news that Jesus was giving them without understanding all of the different layers of meaning, just like accepting it and celebrating it and just soaking it in. I loved it. I just loved it.
My what'll preach is the outdoors are terrible and camping is no good and no one enjoys it ever, and there's no such thing as a good night's sleep on a campsite. And that's no, it's exactly the same thing. Mine is exactly the same thing that you said, Zhenya. Yeah, it's the open-heartedness, it's the open-mindedness, it's the openness and willingness to listen and hear. And of course, when we do baptisms in the sanctuary at our church, we'll say, let the little children come to me and do not hinder them. This is Jesus's words. And then he says on another occasion, you need to have faith like a child. in order to experience the kingdom of God. And so I've heard both of those things and know them very well from the portion of just hearing scripture. And yet this was a chance to actually see what that faith like a child looks like. And it made a lot more sense to me to see that. And it was the openness and willingness to see something true come alive in front of you. And that'll preach. And, you know, a lot of us have, myself included sometimes, really hard hearts, preconceived notions, already made up our mind on things, and not willing to see things as they really are, instead just immediately trying to categorize them in some box we've already formed in our minds. And so seeing what it looks like to actually have faith like a child, an openness like a child, a willingness like a child to listen and to hear and to experience something true come to being in front of you, that'll preach. So last segment, in conclusion, our wow moment. Every episode we look out for something that says wow to us, that gives us an emotional response, that gives us a spiritual response, that really lands with us. I'll start first this time. The wow moment for me was what you alluded to there when you said, he starts to quote from the prophet Isaiah, and the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. And what really resonated with me as the wowness is I've never realized before that was a vulnerable thing to say. I've always exclusively imagined it as basically like a thunderous announcement almost. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. And then, but the way that it played out in this episode, he's teaching, he's modeling. And then when someone asks why, well, why are you here? And then to actually have to say what he's ultimately saying there by quoting Isaiah is like, I'm the Son of God who's here to change the world. And that's, in the way the actor played that moment, where the actor who played Jesus played it with a lot of vulnerability, a lot of almost hesitancy, not because he didn't want to say it, but the actor really embodied the weight of what that confession brings with it. And he made some acting choices that I never would have imagined. And it really impacted me. The idea of, you know, we say all the time things like Jesus was fully human and he felt things like doubt and pain and suffering, etc. But so for him to feel the burden of like, I could just go back to being a craftsman, you know, I could just stay out of the way, I could, etc. Instead, like, this is what I'm here to do. And the emotion, the vulnerability that came with that was, wow, that'll stick with me. How about you, Zhenya? What's your wow?
Oh, I just had to like pause and take a breath when he said, everyone has a much larger job than their trade. And then he goes on and teaches children that you're not just children, you know, you're there to share love, you're there to share respect and honor. And just hearing him describing to us how God sees us. Like God sees so much more of us than we think we are. Like we are so much more special, so much more valuable. So we are created in God's image. I wrote that phrase and I'm like, oh, I wish there was like a Bible verse that actually said that. And then like I tried, I'm like, maybe there is something similar. It's not, it's the creation of the show, but I loved it. I loved how it can look at something so routine, something like you explained, you know, like kids, they were like nuisance, you know, it was not, but he looks at them and that's not what he sees. Like when they pray Shema, like he doesn't hear those like high pitched, you know, voices struggling through the prayer. Like for him, this is like the best sound he can hear if these people praying and the kids. So, but that phrase really got me. Yeah.
Amen. And wow. Friends, that is it. That is the conclusion of this week's episode of the Chosen Aftershow, episode 3 of The Chosen. I'm so glad that you're watching with us. I'm glad that you're tuning in. I think 1,007 minutes of this show were watched last week of y'all watching recaps of us go through the episode. That is itself only about 40 minutes long. So I'm so thankful that so many of you are watching the after show, that are connecting with the church through watching The Chosen. I appreciate you using this as an opportunity to dive deep into the world of Jesus, the people he encounters, the ministry that he does, and the way it impacts them then and us now. Thank you, Zhenya, for another week of prep. Can't wait to be back with you here again. next week at 8 o'clock for the Chosen Aftershow. Just a reminder that in just a few minutes at 9 o'clock, Zhenya leads the prayer room that she leads every single night. Chance to gather together in prayer, talk about the ritual of prayer that marked Jesus's life. You're doing an amazing job leading the community in that in the evening. I lead a 9 a.m. time of devotional and connection, also through the church's Facebook page. And tomorrow night at 8:30, we have something called Pocket Worship, which is a brief 10-minute worship service that's easily consumed and shared, midweek worship to bridge time between worship in the week. So thank you so much. Thanks, friends, for sharing on Facebook. Thanks for being here. God bless you all. We will see you right back here next week for Chosen episode.